So we have a very interesting meeting today. We're going to talk about innovating your business with AI, and Nina has invited three very interesting people who's going to share their experiences and examples from practice with us. We're looking forward to that very much.
We have one guest with us, Erich Prem, who actually is from Austria and has been part of the eSPIM group. So I will leave you actually, Erich, to say a few words about yourself, because I think you'll probably say more important things than I. So please tell us who you are.
Thank you, Nina. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's great to be here. My name is Erich Prem. I'm currently based in Vienna. I run a small strategic technology consultancy. Actually have been doing so for the last 20 years. But what is probably interesting in the context of this event is my background is actually, I used to be an AI researcher. Decades ago, I used to build little robots with my students also, and was in neural networks, so learning machines. But then I got all caught up in technology and innovation management. I have a second hat, which is that of a philosopher, which also turns out to be quite useful in the context of AI. Who would have guessed? So it's actually quite interesting. And I'm very much looking forward to this discussion.
Super. I'm so happy to have you here, Erich. And then I have two wonderful ladies also who are here with us today. Galina Schebena, welcome to this conversation. We've had a couple of conversations before, so this is really nice that we can continue to develop our thoughts about this field. And also Sepideh Pashami, I'm not sure I am pronouncing your name correctly, but you can help me out with that later on. Would you guys like to say a few words about yourselves as well? Galina.
I can start. So my name is Galina Esther Shubina. I'm American, living in Sweden for the last 12 years, and I was born in Soviet Union. So I have a bit of a strange background, and I come from the technology field. I have degrees in math and computer science, and then I spent 10 years out of grad school at Google doing data engineering, data science, some machine learning, some distributed systems. And after that, I went to a couple of companies, helped them build out their machine learning and data science teams. And some of the times in between that, I would go and engage and help companies to figure out how and where they should be integrating what commonly these days we call AI, and what we used to call everything from data science to machine learning to all kinds of other things before. So, and it's really a journey I think I made into toward some kind of like business management consulting, because at some point you realize you want to be building technology that is not going to die in 12 to 18 months, and then you really start engaging more with strategic questions. So, but that's pretty much my background. I would only like to also mention that I'm one of the founders of Women in Data Science Sweden. So we have a community of 1,600 women who are actual practitioners, technology practitioners here in Sweden. And that's something we've been doing with a bunch of amazing people for the last 4 years.
Thank you, Galina. So nice to have you here. And also, I must reveal that you are now building even your own AI startup. So that will be the next phase in your development journey.
Data startup probably, because we might get to that discussion, but that's where one needs to start with data before one gets to a lot of other things, right? So
we'll hear more later. And then we have the lovely Sepideh also with us. Would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Sepideh Pashami. I'm a senior researcher at RISE together with Nina, but I'm working mainly on AI, machine learning. And I'm also a senior lecturer at Halmstad University, south of Sweden. I guess the reason that I'm here is I have been leading several projects together with some big companies like Volvo Group. And we have been trying to implement AI and develop new solutions for the practical problems in practice. At the same time, we also had some project with some sort of startups that they would like to use AI to create innovation and so on. So I think this is where I land.
Yes, exactly. I'm so happy because our speakers today have a wide variety of experiences and contexts in which they have worked with AI. So I think this will increase the richness of the conversation. Johannes, yes, now we have also Erich spotlighted. So I invite everyone to choose the speaker view so you can see the speaker spotlight. It may be easier to understand what we're saying. So let's kick off this conversation. And because now AI has been such a hyped word, and we have a community here that comes originally from innovation management, so not from AI, while here we have 3 experts in AI, I would like to first invite Erich to introduce us shortly to a little bit how would you define AI, but also what are the different types of technologies or AI used in practice, so that we get a little bit of an overview of what are we talking here about. You've been in this field for a long time, so you have a rather good understanding of it.
Well, at least I try. So it's really it's a great question, because there's hardly any other field, and definitely not in technology, that is so much in the media and it catches so much interest, while at the same time being so badly defined what it actually is. So, but this has been the case with AI for at least 3 decades. From the very beginning, it was always not very clear what is it precisely. There are at least 3 good definitions that you could use. What is AI? So one would be to simply, and this is the old one, the traditional one, to say, well, it has something to do with capabilities that humans typically have when we solve problems, when we traditionally the example was, things like chess playing or solving mathematical puzzles. But then people realized actually a lot of what we do, let's say much more subconsciously, such as navigating through the world, analyzing pictures, or simply, understanding what's happening in our environment. All of that also somehow should be a part of our of what we call intelligence. And then more recently, also people said, well, it's not just the rational side. There is also a great deal of emotion, which is also important to consider it as a part of our intelligence. So very complicated. It has something to do that we believe to some extent makes us human. So it has to do with our human capabilities, but at the same time, actually, animal intelligence is also very interesting, and it is also rather complex. And then the tricky thing was that this is kind of a moving target, because in the early days, much of this was very complicated and difficult, and computers couldn't do anything. And now more recently, computers can do some of the things. And it seems like AI is always dealing with those problems that are yet not fully possible. So it's a moving target. So very complicated definition. So people came up maybe with another way of looking at things. And interestingly, also more recently, this is the definition that the European Commission uses, for example, in its proposal for an AI regulation. It simply lists a number of technologies or disciplines, if you like, and says, well, systems that have these features or are embedded in these disciplines, these are AI systems. And this includes, for example, machine learning systems, logic and knowledge-based systems, sometimes called expert systems, statistical approaches, Bayesian and other forms of learning. So it's basically an enumeration. You could add to that computer vision, and other disciplines of computer science. So this is more a way of looking at it historically from the technologies. It's also an interesting definition, and I think we'll talk about this because these fields are relatively far apart. So expert systems and machine learning are not the same. They have an overlap, but they can be very different. Logical approaches are very different from numerical approaches, also mathematically, which also means that different people are doing these things and you may need different experts. Or natural language understanding is a very important aspect of intelligence, and it's also a part of this area. And then a third way of defining it, which is more modern, is to simply say anything that's machine learning is AI. I find that's the only one that is a little bit inappropriate. Although machine learning is very important, but you would leave out a great deal of systems which I think justify being called AI, such as expert systems, and then you would not include them. So complex question, not easy to answer, but this was my short answer.
Thank you, Erich. Sepideh and Galina, would you like to add something or comment on what Erich said?
I would just like to add a small anecdote. So I got my first computer science degree in the 90s, and I had an artificial intelligence, old style, you know, the knowledge systems and the rest. I had a textbook at the time, and in the introduction it said, basically AI is everything that doesn't work in computer science, and when things start working, they stop being AI. And so I think a lot of us who've been in the field for a while, you know, we are kind of recovering from that, because now it's perceived as a field with a lot of successes. But if you talk to the old timers, it's still like, it's a lot about things not working and pushing, finding the right hills to climb and climbing them and getting some results at least.
I can add just a small comment. Generally, when we talk about AI, we want to mimic human intelligence. At least that has been a goal for a while. But now I think we have reached the point that actually maybe we want to go beyond human intelligence. So that's where I stand. I would like to see how can I be even beyond that.
Wow, that's now we're going into the future, so that's great. But I will bring you a little bit for a moment to the present again. So as innovation managers, our interest is really how can we use technology such as AI to innovate different aspects of business. So can I invite you all three to give a few examples of how AI has been used to innovate some aspect of business where you have been part of that process, or that you think is a good example of how companies or public sector organizations today are using different types of AI. Sepideh, would you like to start with this one?
Sure. So I can give an example that I work the most with, which is about predictive maintenance. So we started a few years ago to look at the data coming from the vehicles and monitor their activities and try to see, can we predict a failure before it happens, before it becomes imminent? And how much before was the question, how certain we are was the question, what should be the action after we predict something? No prediction is perfect. I mean, in the AI world, you always come up with probabilities and what should be the right action given that prediction. And we started to look at the data collected from vehicles. The data were like speed, maximum load, many different variables that they were not images. They were normal sensory data, for example, number of breaks that a person make, and so on, total distance that they drive. And we wanted to predict, for example, if a compressor will fail or if an engine will fail, especially for the bigger components was kind of important for the industry, because for cheaper components like filters, and they will change it regularly anyway. So they are not critical, but they are components that if they fail, they are kind of safety critical, and there will be huge costs beside just stopping the road and so on that could again create costs. So they were interested in this kind of components, that they were more complex, harder to detect, but can be detected using the normal sensory data. And we started that with a group connected to Volvo Group, truck company. And then we moved to like quality control, and then later on we moved with buses, and now I'm looking at a project with about electric buses. So they are interested in the predicting, for example, the lifetime of the drive batteries, the batteries that there are hybrid or electric buses that they are working in the city. So it's quite a similar series of projects.
Thank you. Galina, you and I have been collaborating around a framework that RISE has developed together with Gradient Descent called AMI, AI Innovation Maturity Index. And there we looked at different AI maturity levels that organizations can go through. Would you give us a few maybe examples of what could be an example of using AI more like in earlier stages and then maybe more advanced, so to speak, when you start to be more experiential and also experimental and also integrated more widely in the organization?
Yeah, so we distinguish actually between more incremental or bolt-on use cases and between more integrated use cases that are really more innovative. And we find that generally companies start with more incremental use cases, looking more at how to optimize their business, whether it's on time, on money, on quality, or on something else. That's also tends to be a safer way to experiment and much easier to sell this type of cases to the management. So I would probably say that, for example, if you take more or less any single fintech companies that I've seen, they start out with two specific use cases. One of them is around fraud detection, because it's a really expensive problem that is really important to automate and even be able to prioritize which transactions humans should be looking at in what order. So fraud detection is one, and the other one I would say is credit scoring, which is a little bit more open-ended, and it's not like you're denying people directly, but it allows you again to automate part of your business and to improve it and to optimize it. So so this type of use cases, like I would say, around automation, some basic automation, or around optimization is where companies tend to start. Usually after that, they develop some capacities and they understand better how technology works. And, at that point, they have some technology teams built up also and more understanding in the management. And then they really start looking at more transformational use cases. So I think for that, I would probably mention more something. So I build a team, a software team at Northvolt, at electrical battery manufacturer. And what I will describe is generally, we never got there while I was there at least, but, typical process, we wanted to start with quality questions. How do you evaluate quality of something automatically at the end of each process step when you manufacture something? But really transformational thing would be to collect data from all of the steps of production and look at the final quality and where failures enter, and basically look at their entire factory and be able to analyze and see what really affects your production and your quality and do a kind of a global optimization. So this type of cases, they can really be transformational. Yeah, and in addition to that, we developed some ways to keep track of data from the battery packs, slightly related incidentally to what Sepideh worked with for Volvo, I think. So we were taking data out of battery packs. So in my time, we were only able to start streaming this data, but the ideal would be to incorporate this data into entire end-to-end quality chain that would automatically analyze and be able to tell you where your problems are. So, so that would be an example that would be more transformational, for example.
Mm. And Galina, you also worked at Google for quite some years. Is there anything we can learn from Google in terms of how one can innovate business with AI, since that's kind of a core technology that Google uses in their
I think in many ways it is important to remember that Google and Amazon are very special companies, and few other companies will be like this. They have developed a lot of the core technologies. So they were some of the first people that they built their big data infrastructure. And then a lot of it got open sourced many, many years later. And they still had a competitive advantage on some of it because they built their own data centers, for example. But I actually worked a lot on AdWords, on the main monetization systems, and creating machine learning systems to help optimize and improve them. So, you could, I'm not sure at this point it might count as an incremental example. At the time, it was more transformational in like 2006. we crawled all the web pages of all of our advertisers, and then we evaluated their quality, and then we used this quality score as part of deciding what to show to the users. So, for example, advertisers that had worse pages, like low quality pages, they would have to pay more to compare to those who had higher quality pages. And that was a way to, we thought about it as optimizing the user experience and thinking long term. And that's another thing. I think in some cases, AI allows you to think a little bit more long term, because what you want as a business in 10 years and not piss off your users right now with a lot of bad ads, for example. So you're trying to figure out how to think about it and which data you can bring to it and how you can make it scalable, really, like to bring special technology around it. So but yes, I think Google is a very special, and this was before deep learning hype and stuff like this. We can talk a little bit more relevant to what Erich was talking about. Philosophy comes into it, whether the current deep learning system, they can get to meaning in anything. I don't think they can yet. But for business, these things are really, really important right now. And they will be important, I think, for every single company.
Erich, you've also interviewed several people, for example, in Austria, to get a better understanding of how AI is used to innovate the business. What would you say are kind of the areas where there is still a lot of opportunities to innovate with AI, but that maybe are not used currently so much?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it's so we did a study of how AI is being used in Austria, and mostly focusing on smaller firms, but also the big ones. And this was already 2 years ago now, and it was fascinating already then that basically they are everywhere. So there is really I wouldn't say it's a lot, but they are in every application sector. That's what I mean. And the reason is a large part of AI can be explained by simply saying it is automated model construction. So in the old days, you would have a statistician who sits down and analyzes data, and then typically fits a linear or some small degree curve model to the data. And nowadays we just take the data, throw it in an AI algorithm, and hope that we get the right model out that satisfies the data and also helps to deal with new data. And then it depends on what you want. Typically what you do is, for example, classifying data, or you forecast data, or you do a combination. And then these can be relatively small models, which is nice because they can also work with relatively small data. And I think there are many applications that are still being developed, and everywhere in the industry, especially when you have, for example, let's say any engineering field. This is where it's really very practical. It can go from optimizing your production plant to classifying the quality of your products, to forecasting demand and things like that. So if you have a decent amount of data, and maybe we can talk about what this means, and if you know what you want, AI can be a good solution to get some satisfactory results in these areas. So that is one, and this is so broad that it's very difficult to give examples. It ranges from from insurance companies to optimizing, as I said, parameters in a production plant, to analyzing errors you make when interpreting sensor data, and so all sorts of that. But that is a wide application field, and here there is still a lot to do. There's still a lot to do, because in the meantime, we have also learned a little bit more about how to deal with missing data. We have learned how to evaluate these models a bit better, so that we're not surprised when suddenly the results don't fit. We know some of the do's and don'ts, and maybe we should briefly talk about this. There's one area which we have not touched so far, really, which is natural language and its many applications. So I think this is still something that where we will see a great rollout in, for example, small and medium-sized enterprises, because it has become a relatively mature technology, at least for limited domains, both understanding language, spoken language, but also interpreting written language, analyzing linguistic data. And there are many companies who can use this, from tourism, understanding what their customers want, helping with translation. Translation has become of reasonable, acceptable quality for many language pairs. Not all of them. Not sure about Swedish, actually. I think probably you're doing good, but Finnish Maltese is probably still a challenging language pair, but I don't know. So for some reason, for some areas, there's good progress and nearly off-the-shelf tools that you could use. And the third one, which we also haven't addressed yet, is certain kinds of robotics. Maybe not so much the autonomous car, which is still very, very challenging, but just think about the lawnmowers and the carpet vacuum cleaners that so many people have bought, despite that this is rather limited intelligence, but they are fairly robust, and we will see more also in this area.
Thank you. So now maybe to bring it back to the innovation management, so to speak, in the context where we are today, when we've been looking at different studies and talking to different people from practice, it seems that a lot of companies have started to experiment a little bit with AI, but many get a little bit stuck in this pilot project, so to speak, and then struggle with increasing, widening their adoption and integration of AI across the organization. So here the question is, in what ways do you think that, in a way, innovation managers could support this process of integrating AI more widely into organizations and helping with I guess also using it across different functions in organization? We now spoke mainly of using it in the core business, for example, transforming the factory or whatever, but in a way, all functions in an organization in the future probably will be affected by AI solutions, from finance, HR, you name it. So how do you see, I'm just interested, since you come more from the AI side, do you see, like, in any ways how we as innovation managers could help companies move forward in their AI journey? Maybe Erich, since you come a little bit from this community, you can start this time.
Well, I think this is a very valid question. It's hugely important, and I want to, before we start, I want to say that I think it's still early days. So we are happy if we understand the AI side of things, but then combining it with the innovation side is still a challenge. And I give you, at least there are two areas, and I'm sure both Sepideh and Galina can elaborate on that. So one is the big challenge of designing, first understanding, do we have enough data? Then training models, evaluating models properly. All of this, which used to be a rather dark, wizardy science or an undertaking until recently. Now we understand a little better. We know some of the things we should avoid, and this is part of innovation management, because since AI has a certain unpredictability inherently in the design process, it makes it difficult for innovation management, in the sense that both the people developing the AI, but even more so the managers, need to understand that before you have tried it, it is very difficult to predict whether it's going to work at all, and if it's going to work, how well, how good's the quality, and these are some challenges that definitely are challenges for management. The second is management of the human resources. That is also a huge challenge. I mentioned before how broad the field of AI is. We're talking about natural language systems, robotic systems, learning systems, logic systems. These are four very different fields. You need four different capabilities. technical capabilities in order to be able to do them well. This poses the third question, which I've been recently confronted with, very interesting one. A large industrial player in the automotive industry asked me a very simple question, whether I would recommend an AI department or AI competences in each of their different technology strands. This is a big question in terms of innovation management. How do you organize this? You know, how do you make sure that you have both an understanding of the technology and of the market, which is really demanding. I think I'll just leave it here, otherwise take too much of the time.
Yeah, Galina, we've had a few conversations on this topic, both covering fields like how do we build more innovative mindset, for example, in organization. We also looked at how innovation management and AI developers have some similarities in the development process, so to speak. But I'm just curious, what do you think? Where do you think is the place for innovation managers in this story?
I think coming from with my engineering manager hat on, and you know, I have I guess very similar questions also about where in organization people should fit. But the important question is, how do you integrate this into the organization in a way that you create the right expectations among everyone? And that's rather difficult, because I find that a lot of companies, they start out with the management kind of saying, you know, it's a technology, you know, we know how this one works. But this one works a little bit differently, as Erich was saying. It's unpredictable in a variety of ways. So when you build this technology, it tends to be that you you develop something, you create a machine learning model, and maybe you integrate it into a product. And the first time you do it, it is going to suck. So that's just how the process works. Usually you're going to get bad error rates, and things will not be as good as you expect them to. And there has to be understanding that this is actually the start of the process. The project has to not get killed. It's at that point it really starts to grow, and this understanding of what would work better. Can you improve the model? Has the data that you started to collect, you know, after this integration, because when you develop the model, you usually develop it you're using some kind of historical data, you know, like, are your things going to, you know, like, there has to be an understanding of the development process. I think I can go on about it, but that's the summary of it. So that's one thing. The second thing is that most of the machine learning models and AI type things, unless it's specific automation, like a robot needs to do precisely the right thing, right? But most of the things, they give you some kind of ambiguous answer, and you need to think about how it is going to get integrated into your product. What is it going to look like? So I will give you a really old-fashioned example of recommendation systems. So if you go to a web page, to Amazon's web page, for example, you get some very personalized recommendations. They're of course really famous for this. Or you go to Netflix page, you get this type of stuff. But you know, if you're a new user, you know, you need to be able to, you know, give a user something when they show up for the first time that seems kind of reasonable. So you have to have ways to have fallbacks, and it has to be integrated in a good way into a product. Or if you accidentally launch a bad machine learning model, you need to have some kind of a fallback available so that you don't totally jeopardize your entire product while this is being fixed. So there's kind of a variety of things around it. And I think innovation managers could help by working to create the right expectations among everyone, to explain things to people, because, you know, there are people who worked in this field forever, and yes, they can talk to the management, but really we need more of that. And it is also very important when this type of technology is integrated inside the organizations, and it is improving some process for innovation managers or somebody else to help with the change management around it. I think one of the things I can say that technologists don't really understand is exactly how much change management is required to integrate this type of things. They're like, oh my God, this thing is awesome. Go use it, people. It's like, nope, not going to happen. And you guys all know it. I see smiles on your faces, right?
Yeah, so a big field.
So that's some of the stuff, but I mean, there are a couple of other aspects. I'm not sure which parts of it you would like to cover.
Yeah, no, I think a big area where definitely innovation managers can help is building this culture of, experimenting with new technologies such as AI across organization, because there's been a lot of fears among employees about losing jobs or, replacing tasks with AI and so on and so forth. So one is this creating engagement, better understanding, and supporting more experimentation across the company. But the other one is, as you said, Galina, also kind of helping in the processes where we're developing and integrating AI to have a bit more cross-functional collaboration, so to speak, so that we have both domain experts, AI people, but also others in organization who might have to help with the change process that will be part of this AI integration. So I was curious, Seppi, that you helped in a program that was developed for small companies experimenting with AI. And I think that if I understood there, you had this a little bit idea of combining different competencies. So both the kind of user experience design, AI developers, but also people that understand business, so to speak, so that we don't end up just the tech people driving this, but having a more interdisciplinary collaboration. Can you give a little bit your reflection on how that has worked, and has it been different to work with this kind of AI innovation projects in small companies compared to big companies?
In my experience, like, the innovation happens when we talk to each other. So as a researcher, before talking to the business people, I have no idea how they can use this technology or which technology is relevant for them. And it's the same for them. I mean, usually business people have interesting challenges, but they have no idea if the current technology can resolve those, or how difficult it is, how far in future we are talking about, or is it something already existing too. So in our experience with this project that you mentioned, this was with to support the small companies, SMEs. And the idea was that, so one SME company together with some researchers from university or any other places, plus some user, as you said, like designers and so on, that kind of prototype product together. So they sit together, they brainstorm, and they try to see what they can do in a 6 months project. And the main reason for that was, usually when you talk to small companies, they have a challenge of knowing what is possible to do in a short term. And maybe they don't need necessarily the most cutting edge technology, but rather like the existing tools and like adapting that to their needs. And usually they have, for example, 1 data scientist, 2 data scientists maximum. So you want at the same time to help those to define a project, to maintain a project, to kind of create a project. So that was one example that we tried with companies, and we have been running this program now for 2 years almost. So sometimes it has been super successful, so it leads to a product. Sometimes it hasn't been. So it has been just the idea exploration. So I'm not saying that this is the only way to go forward, but it seems promising. At least at the end of the project, this 6 months, everybody is happy of this small project that they have done together. But in comparison, like when I talk to the bigger companies, they usually don't know they know what they want. So it's not like the small companies. They know what they want. They have a vision. But sometimes, first of all, they need a roadmap, and they need some sort of more advanced techniques that maybe they don't exist, because they want to stay cutting edge, or they want to stay in the competition. So their goals are different, I think. And that usually needs a longer term project, kind of more infrastructure, sometimes like a bigger group of, for example, 10 people, and so on, to drive such a project, I think.
Yeah, I think that touches upon two things that we discussed when we were preparing for this event. One is that we have to distinguish between using off-the-shelf solutions, as you mentioned, that there's probably a lot of opportunities already to start there, so to speak, and especially for smaller companies that don't have the capacity to build up a huge AI team. And then also developing your own solutions internally, and that it's also probably we will need different types of competencies that you need to build up in the future, depending on what kind of company you are, and yeah, how you want to work with AI. Did you want to comment something on that, Sepideh?
I totally agree with you. But I also want to emphasize the thing that Erich and Galina mentioned, that sometimes developing a team for AI needs a different process. Some managers are not happy with us because sometimes AI seems such an open-ended project. So you do something, you still have some ideas how to improve it. There is no guarantee that those ideas will improve them, and so on. So it's like a loop. And
here we share the experiences. When you work with innovation, you never know what will be the result either. So that's something we have in common, AI developers and innovation managers. So maybe if we team up, we can together convince the managers better. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that was it.
Galina, you were raising your hand before or something. Did you want to add something to what Sepideh was saying?
Yeah, we discussed this a little bit, but I think it is very important for companies to separate out when they would like to integrate AI into secondary processes, as I was commenting, and when they want to integrate potentially AI into their core processes or their core products and things which are really key strategically for them, because there are different approaches that really should be applied to those two things. I think in one case, and we could probably just discuss that for an hour, but it is quite essential to separate, even though both things kind of would be yielding some kind of ROI one way or another. Hopefully, one needs to think about them very differently, I would probably say. So I'm not sure I want to say more because, we have more of a conversation to have. I see Erich nodding his head.
I would suggest that we use the last, what we have, 7 minutes to raise some of the things that has been posted in chat. And I know Erich wanted to respond to a question that came in through Elizabeth, who asked, do you have any practical examples on how innovation managers can benefit and use AI in the daily work? For example, in the ideation, project development, tools and processes, trend analysis, and so on. Erich, would you like to share your answer?
Thanks. Of course, my immediate response would be, don't ask how AI can help you, but ask how you can help AI. And the reason I'm saying this is precisely for what has just been mentioned, both by Galina and Sepideh. It is really important that innovation managers understand the challenges inherent in any AI development process. If this is relevant, for your company and there is some AI going on or will be going on, then innovation managers are the ones who I would expect to play a role in negotiating these processes, making company management understand where the challenges are, warning them. Maybe is it a bit paradox, because I think in AI we need innovation managers not so much to do what they usually do, to push for innovation, but maybe occasionally also to warn against innovation or to overestimating, as it so often happens, what AI can do, and to overestimate one model that may look very pretty, but then when you roll it out, in a broad application scenario, will probably fail for one or the other reason. So innovation managers, I think, are those people who could do that, who can negotiate this between the engineers and company management. But of course, there are also now AI technologies in supporting innovation management, and we will see a lot more. I think for the time being, most of it is more on the marketing side. So in market analysis, for example, there is a lot going on. understanding or exploiting discussions in user fora, trend analysis in where people talk about what the products do or don't. So identifying innovation opportunities, I think, is one field where the use of AI is relatively clear and where we have a clear picture. In other areas such as ideation or project management, I'm yet to see, something that there are experiments and some of them are okay, but I don't think this is, as you said, off the shelf already.
Galina, you wanted to comment, yeah.
I'm going to comment from my experience and of something that I first saw at Google, and after that I saw in one or two companies, but both for innovation and for these types of projects that involve machine learning, which are very end-to-end in many ways, it is very essential to have a fairly open company. And this requires that people can look up information from one set of company to another and to be able to search it and to do what we used to call information retrieval and what these days we would probably call AI. So it is actually quite essential to have excellent collaboration tools and excellent search tools and things like this. And it was more important than you think. I think we all forget about this picks and shovels of stuff, but these are the things that really make something work and create fewer misunderstandings of the type that can sink companies. But also if there's a bit of a more of an open situation, people can look up information, search information, do things with it. They come up with better ideas. They talk to more of the right people. There are various companies that say, oh, we will do something and we will help your company, allow you to find experts within your company. There's probably space for stuff like this. I personally think that if you have a great intranet that utilizes AI technology, a lot of it can be solved that way also. So I would say, I find that collaboration tools is a forgotten thing, but is a very important thing.
Thank you, Galina. And now before we take a little break, we had another question from Antonio that I think is a nice one to conclude with here, that goes like, could you please, to what extent do you believe in the idea of AI democratization within companies? Is it achievable? Who wants to go first?
Depends on what we mean by AI democratization. I think we tend to talk more about data democratization, about making data really accessible to people.
Antonio, would you like to explain what you meant in your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Nina. I was referring to the idea of more and more we are seeing low code, no code applications. So in order to spread, in the same fashion that we try to spread out an innovation mentality across the company, everybody has innovation responsibilities. The idea is with those new technologies, low code, no code, do you really believe it's possible to democratize AI within the companies? That was the context of the question. Of course, data democratization is part of the equation, but I was going one step further on the democratization of the AI itself.
So you mean, is it possible to move in direction where all employees across the company would somehow integrate or explore how AI can become part?
Not all, but a large section of the employee base, we call this citizen, the concept of citizen data science. That's what we talk more and more. Exactly. And from your experiences, is it really an achievable goal? Is it possible to get to that point?
Thank you, Antonio.
Thanks, Nina.
Okay, guys, who wants to?
Maybe I can comment on that. We have started some courses during the COVID time, and to give initial idea of Python and some of the concepts in machine learning and so on. And we had surprisingly many applicants. It was impressive to see that from many different sectors, people coming, taking these courses, without being even part of their job. So it's not, I think the knowledge is growing, and I think in future even our universities will change a bit of the direction of not only like kind of training engineers, not only training managers, training something in between. I think we will go toward that direction of finding a common platform for education, because not everybody needs to know everything about the particular technology to be able to apply it in a certain system. For example, if you are working in as an example that you mentioned, natural language processing, so it's just enough that you know about the techniques that exist there to implement it in a certain organization. You don't need to know the techniques that exist for robotics. So that's kind of they become more and more specialized, and therefore people probably wouldn't need to go toward a complete education to learn them, given the fact that they have some background in programming and something, so they can take certain online course, they can upgrade themselves to implement something that they need. I think that it will go toward that direction then. In that sense, organization become a little bit more dynamic. But again, still, you don't need everybody to know AI. We need people to understand what's possible with it, what's not possible with it, in most of the cases. For example, when I talk to many of the managers, one of their challenges, they don't know when to buy the technology, when to do it themselves, or how to maintain it. So I think these knowledges are the key things that they need. Then they can decide that, okay, this doesn't worth that much that they are selling them to them. Or this, if I buy it, it doesn't make sense because after 2 years becomes irrelevant, this technology. So why should I buy it now? And then after 2 years, I have to buy something else. You know, these are the things that we need to educate more than the technology, underlying technology, I think.
Thank you. Do you have any last comments, Erich and Galina, before we take a little break?
Oh, I'm fine. I think Sepideh made a very important point.
Galina, you talked about this AutoML and how it's gonna kind of make it easier to disseminate these tools.
And it's very interesting because AutoML, and Erich was mentioning a lot of natural language processing stuff before. I think a lot of the simple applications are maturing there, and AutoML is maturing, but also kind of a no-code tooling is maturing. And I expect to see much more of it as people get more educated, and they will apply it to their own processes and their own bolt-on use cases, incremental use cases. I would say that if people want to apply this type of stuff to more strategic use cases in the main domain, there should be a bigger conversation, because what I have seen in companies is when you have like 6 teams trying to apply AI to some of the main cases with the main data, what happens is that you end up paying 6 times for different data infrastructure. And that's not an efficient way of doing it. So that would be my only warning. Then for the main cases, you really have to think how to optimize costs and how to think about it a little bit and how not to duplicate the work.
Yeah, and I think that we all already use AI apps in our daily life. So I think as we go and more solutions will be there also to use in the work context, I definitely think we're going towards democratization of AI, which is also already there often, but we don't even think about it. Okay, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.